By the time the creek went silent, Warren Harrow had already learned that an HOA could steal more than privacy. He lived at the very end of Mallard Hook Court in Cypress Bend Estates, where the asphalt curled into a clean little cul-de-sac and stopped beneath 3 old sycamores. His house was a modest white ranch with green shutters, a sloped roof, and a back porch that faced a narrow ribbon of water most neighbors barely noticed. Every morning before sunrise, Warren carried 1 mug of black coffee outside, set it on the porch rail, and listened to that creek speak through the reeds. Then he counted what was still his. The sound was never dramatic, never loud, just a steady silver trickle over stone, soft enough to hide beneath the hiss of sprinkler heads and the distant hum of a pool pump near the clubhouse. In July, the air smelled of hot asphalt, cut grass, and the faint chemical bite of chlorine drifting from the community pool 2 streets over. In October, wet leaves gathered along the bank, and the creek carried the cold mineral smell of mud, roots, and rainwater coming down from the ridge beyond the development. It was ordinary in the way sacred things often are. Warren was 63, white-haired at the temples, broad-shouldered but thinner than he used to be, with the kind of quiet face people mistook for weakness. His wife, Helen, had loved that back porch because the creek made the evenings feel less empty, and after she passed, Warren kept her wicker chair exactly where she had left it. He did not host cookouts, join committees, or argue on the neighborhood message board. He paid his dues, trimmed his hedges, and waved once when the HOA golf cart rolled by with its little electric whine. That was all the neighborhood knew of him. Before retirement, he had spent 31 years reading county drainage maps, stormwater plans, and flood control files, which was why he trusted old records more than new promises. Cypress Bend Estates looked like the kind of place realtors described with clean words: peaceful, managed, desirable, protected. Mailboxes matched, lawns were measured by the inch, and the entrance sign had new uplighting that clicked on at dusk like a stage set. Near the clubhouse, the HOA had been building what Beverly Lowell called Cypress Bend Serenity Lake, though most older residents knew it was just a man-made basin scraped into clay, lined with stone, and dressed up with benches, ornamental grasses, and a walking path nobody had asked for. Still, the board loved it. A water view amenity, even a manufactured one, looked good in a listing description. The first notice arrived before Warren knew anything was wrong. It was tucked into his storm door in a plastic sleeve, printed on thick cream paper with the HOA seal at the top and Beverly Lowell's signature at the bottom. Preliminary Creekline Appearance Advisory, it said, followed by a warning that visible backyard water features must maintain community harmony standards and may be subject to inspection fees beginning at $46.35 per review. Warren read it twice at the kitchen table while the refrigerator ticked and the morning light moved across Helen's empty chair. He did not understand why anyone would inspect a creek that had been there before the subdivision, before the clubhouse, before Beverly's clipboard ever existed. But he folded the notice neatly and placed it in a drawer. Outside, a golf cart slowed in front of his house, tires crunching softly over loose gravel near the curb, then moved on. The creek kept running behind him, patient and low, threading through cattails and stones as it had for decades. Warren stood on the porch that evening until the mosquitoes came out and the first clubhouse lights reflected faintly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, sprinklers clicked, sprayed, and clicked again, watering lawns that had never known drought because someone else always managed the inconvenience. The creek sounded the same as always. For now, 3 mornings after the advisory, Warren stepped onto the back porch and heard nothing where the creek should have been. The sprinkler heads along Mallard Hook Court still hissed in perfect arcs, and a lawn crew 2 houses over was blowing dry oak leaves into brown paper bags. Somewhere near the clubhouse, a maintenance cart beeped as it backed up, sharp and cheerful in the warm air. But behind Warren's house, the water had gone quiet. He stood with his coffee cooling in his hand, staring past Helen's empty wicker chair toward the cattails that leaned over the bank like tired old men. The creek bed was not dry, not completely, but the silver ribbon had shrunk into a chain of dull puddles between exposed stones. A sour smell rose from the mud, cold and trapped, the kind of smell that belonged under boards or inside a neglected drainage ditch. That was when Warren set the mug down untouched. He put on his work boots, took the old survey cane from the garage, and walked down the narrow slope behind the house. Each step made a soft sucking sound where the bank had lost its moisture unevenly, damp in one place and cracked in another. Dragonflies hovered over the remaining puddles, and a few small minnows flickered in water too shallow to hide them. Something had interrupted the flow. Warren followed the creek line past the rear corner of his lot, moving slowly through waist-high weeds and dead goldenrod. 40 yards downstream, he saw the first sign of fresh work: pale crushed stones scattered over dark soil, too clean to have washed there naturally. Beyond it, half hidden behind a screen of ornamental switchgrass, a black corrugated culvert pipe jutted from a newly packed berm that had not been there the week before. Warren crouched beside it and touched the soil. It was still damp underneath. The pipe angled away from the natural creek bed, cutting toward the low swale that fed the HOA's new lake near the clubhouse. Riprap had been stacked along the old channel like a crude dam, with straw netting pressed into the mud and green utility flags fluttering in the morning heat. A small contractor's tag on one stake called the work "temporary landscape stabilization," which sounded harmless until Warren followed the angle of the pipe. No county marker, no permit placard, no posted notice. Warren took out his phone and photographed everything: the pipe, the berm, the diverted flow, the tire tracks left by compact equipment, the fresh orange clay smeared across the grass. He took wide shots first, then close-ups with his boot in frame for scale. He photographed the water line on the stones and the exposed roots of the sycamores where the bank had dropped faster than any natural dry spell would allow. Then he stood very still. That was when the golf cart whined behind him. Beverly Lowell rolled to a stop on the common area path in a cream blazer, beige slacks, and nude heels that sank a quarter-inch into the soft ground every time she shifted her weight. Her silver blonde hair was pinned into a tight bun, and a laminated HOA badge tapped lightly against her chest as she stepped out, holding her plastic-covered clipboard. She looked at Warren's phone, then at the creek bed, then gave him the polished smile of someone who had practiced sounding reasonable while being unreasonable. "Mr. Harrow, we're asking residents not to interfere with water feature improvements during the lake enhancement phase." Warren did not raise his voice. He pointed the survey cane toward the new culvert and asked who had authorized work on his creek. Beverly's smile thinned, but it did not disappear. She said the board had approved drainage beautification to support neighborhood value, shoreline consistency, and long-term community appeal. The words floated there like perfume over mud. Warren looked past her toward the direction of Serenity Lake, where the morning sun flashed off water that had not belonged there yesterday. Then he looked back at the dry stones behind his house. "That creek predates your board," he said. Beverly clicked her pen once against the clipboard and told him visible waterways adjacent to HOA-managed areas fell under community standards review. She said it kindly, as if kindness could make it true. Then she warned him that unauthorized measuring, photographing, or marking of shoreline conditions could be treated as disruption of a managed aesthetic feature. The golf cart battery hummed. The cattails barely moved. Warren slid his phone into his shirt pocket and gave her one slow nod. Not agreement, not surrender, just acknowledgement that she had said enough. The notice arrived the next afternoon, tucked into Warren's storm door with the same careful cruelty as the first one. The plastic sleeve was fogged from the humidity, and a tiny dead gnat had stuck to the inside corner where the paper pressed against the glass. Across the street, sprinklers chopped the sunlight into bright mist while the HOA golf cart crawled past the cul-de-sac at walking speed. Warren opened the door, pulled the notice free, and smelled warm ink, damp paper, and the faint burnt dust scent of his old window air conditioner running behind him. He already knew Beverly had written something down. At the kitchen table, under the brass pendant light Helen had picked out 15 years earlier, he unfolded the letter and read it without blinking. Creekline appearance disturbance fee, $218.70, it said, citing unauthorized placement of visual markers, unapproved resident inspection activity, and disruption of a water-adjacent aesthetic corridor. Beneath that, in smaller print, Beverly had added a shoreline harmony review charge of $46.35, assessed for administrative evaluation of his conduct near a community-managed feature. Warren set the paper flat with 2 fingers. Outside the window, the creek bed showed through the trees like an old scar, its stones pale and dry where water had run all spring. The remaining puddles had turned brown around the edges, and a slow bubble rose from the mud near the exposed roots of the sycamore. A blue jay landed on the porch rail, cocked its head, then vanished when a leaf blower started somewhere down the block. The neighborhood kept making noise as if nothing had happened. Warren opened the drawer where he had placed the first advisory and took out a gray file folder. He wrote the date on the second notice in block letters, then placed it behind the first one. After that, he walked to the garage and brought back a wooden yardstick, 3 cedar stakes, a roll of white mason line, and a small orange notebook with a cracked vinyl cover. He did not rush. By 4 o'clock, the air had thickened, and the smell of hot asphalt rose from Mallard Hook Court in slow waves. Warren stood at the creek bank and pushed the first stake into the mud exactly 12 inches from the old waterline stain on a flat stone. He measured the depth of the remaining puddle, wrote down 3 1/4 inches, took a photograph, and tied one short strip of white line to the stake so it would show clearly in the frame. Then he moved 10 feet downstream and did it again. His boots made a low crunch where dry leaves had collected against the bank, and every few minutes he paused to listen for water under the weeds. There was only the faint trickle being pulled through the new culvert, whispering in the wrong direction. On the third stake, Warren noticed tire impressions pressed into the back edge of his lot, narrow and ribbed, likely from a compact loader or utility cart. He photographed them with a folding ruler beside each track. He photographed the green flags near the berm, the straw netting pinned into the soil, the fresh rock placed across the old channel, and the unnatural angle where water now slid away toward the HOA lake. One picture became 10. 10 became 30. At dusk, Beverly returned with Calvin Pike, the property manager, seated beside her in the golf cart like a man who wished he had chosen another afternoon to be employed. Beverly wore a red blazer this time, bright as a stop sign, and her heels clicked against the stepping stones Warren had set near the side yard. Calvin held a tablet, but he kept looking at the ground. Beverly lifted her clipboard and told Warren that continued documentation of common view landscape conditions could be considered non-compliant behavior. Warren capped his pen. He asked whether the HOA was now fining residents for writing numbers in notebooks. Calvin's eyes dropped to the creek bed. Beverly smiled harder and said the board had authority to preserve visual harmony around all community water features, including transitional shoreline zones visible from approved walking paths. It sounded official because she had practiced it. Warren looked at the nearly dry creek, then at the full lake glinting beyond the trees, where clubhouse lights were beginning to shimmer on the diverted surface. A mosquito whined near his ear, and somewhere behind Beverly, the pool gate clanged shut with a hollow metallic snap. He folded the orange notebook closed and placed it in his shirt pocket. "Put that in writing too," he said. Beverly's pen stopped tapping for half a second. Then Warren walked back to his porch, leaving the stakes exactly where they were, white lines motionless in the heavy evening air. Warren drove to the county records office the next morning before the heat had fully risen off the pavement. He parked beneath a live oak whose roots had buckled the sidewalk, locked his truck, and carried the gray folder under one arm like a man going to renew a license, not challenge an entire HOA. Inside, the building smelled of floor wax, old paper, and burnt coffee from a machine that had probably been there since the 90s. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At the front counter, a young clerk asked what he needed, and Warren slid a handwritten list across the laminate surface: original subdivision plat, stormwater drainage plan, easement index, culvert permits, flood control maintenance notes, and any recorded exceptions tied to parcel 14C. The clerk looked at the list, then looked at Warren. Most homeowners asked for fence lines. Warren did not explain himself. He only gave his parcel number and waited while the clerk disappeared behind a gray, door-marked records retrieval. Around him, the county moved at its usual speed. Printers clicking, phones ringing, shoes squeaking softly on polished tile. A contractor in a neon vest argued about permit fees 2 windows down, and an older woman in a sun hat asked where to file a septic complaint. Warren stood still, both hands folded over the head of his cane. Patience had always been cheaper than anger. 20 minutes later, Elliot Ward came out instead of the clerk, carrying 2 rolled maps and a cardboard file box with a barcode label on the side. Elliot was in his late 40s, pale, neat, and careful, with reading glasses hanging from a cord and a tie loosened just enough to suggest he had already lost one battle with the day. He introduced himself as assistant records supervisor and asked Warren whether this was about a boundary dispute. Warren said it was about water. Elliot's expression changed slightly. In a side room with a long table, they unrolled the first plat map and weighted the corners with staplers. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the ink was clear enough. Cypress Bend before the stone entrance sign, before the clubhouse, before Beverly Lowell's lake had ever been scraped into clay. Warren traced one finger along the blue line marked Natural Drainage Channel E3, then stopped at the rear of his lot. Elliot leaned closer. The creek was not a decorative feature. It was a recorded drainage corridor. Warren asked for the stormwater sheet from the original approval package. Elliot pulled it from the box, and the smell of old blueprint paper rose into the room, dry and sharp, like dust baked in a closed attic. There it was again, channel protection language, maintenance setback, no obstruction without county review, no private impoundment without hydrology certification. Warren did not smile. He turned the page. On the third sheet, half hidden below a faded elevation note, he found the words he had hoped were still there: floodgate access and operation reserved to parcel 14C. Elliot read the line twice. Warren reached into his folder and removed the photographs from his backyard. The black culvert, the fresh berm, the riprap dam, the tire tracks, the dry water line on the stones. He laid them beside the county map, one by one, until the whole thing became simple enough for anyone honest to understand. The water had been moved. Elliot took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and asked whether the HOA had filed a drainage modification permit. Warren already knew the answer, but he let Elliot search the database. The keyboard clicks were small in the quiet room. No permit appeared. No hydrology report. No county approval. Just silence on a screen where permission should have been. Warren looked at the old floodgate notation again, remembering years spent reading maps exactly like this when developers tried to turn natural water into marketing language. Back then, he had been the man who knew which lines could not be crossed. Apparently, he still was. Elliot printed certified copies, stamped them in blue ink, and clipped a request form for stormwater review to the top. Warren signed with a steady hand. Outside, the noon sun hit the parking lot hard, and the smell of hot tar lifted from the asphalt. Warren placed the certified maps on the passenger seat, started his truck, and sat for a moment before driving home. Beverly had given him paper. Now he had better paper. By the time Warren turned back onto Mallard Hook Court, Beverly Lowell had already sent the next notice. It sat against his storm door in another plastic sleeve, perfectly centered, as if the neatness could make the accusation legitimate. The afternoon sun had softened the adhesive strip until one corner curled away from the glass, and a line of ants moved along the threshold beneath it. Warren carried the county maps inside first. Then he retrieved the notice. The house was quiet except for the ticking kitchen clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the faint, dry scrape of leaves moving across the back patio. Warren set the certified plat copies on the table, placed Beverly's new letter beside them, and read it under the same brass pendant light. This one was longer, with more words in bold and more phrases designed to sound like law without becoming law. It accused him of continued unauthorized shoreline interference, resident-created visual disruption, and failure to cooperate with approved community lake stabilization measures. At the bottom, Beverly had added a new charge, $31.95 for an unauthorized survey marker removal notice, even though Warren had removed nothing. Beneath that, in smaller print, she had added a $12.85 per day water feature noncompliance surcharge beginning immediately. She had started billing the silence of a creek. Warren folded the paper once, wrote the date in the top right corner, and slid it into the gray folder behind the others. Outside, the remaining puddles in the creek bed had turned darker, and the mud smelled sourer in the heat. The white mason lines on his stakes hung limp, clean, and visible, exactly where he had left them. Farther toward the clubhouse, the new lake flashed bright blue between the trees, full enough now for the fountain to run in the middle with a thin mechanical hiss. The sound carried strangely across the neighborhood. Water was moving, just not where it belonged. That evening, the HOA held what Beverly called an informational update at the clubhouse. Warren did not attend it first. He sat on his porch with the stormwater review form on his lap, listening to golf carts roll past in pairs, their tires crunching over the gravel at the curve. Neighbors were going to hear about property values, lakefront appeal, maintenance reserves, and the importance of unity. They were not going to hear about the black culvert behind his lot. Around 7, Mrs. Crane from Juniper Bend walked by with a reusable grocery bag and paused near Warren's driveway. She was in her 70s, careful on her feet, and had always liked Helen. She asked if he was going to the meeting. Warren said not yet. She looked toward the clubhouse lights, then toward the dry creek, and her face tightened in a way that told him people were starting to notice more than Beverly wanted them to notice. At the clubhouse, Beverly stood beneath recessed lights beside a foam-board rendering of Serenity Lake. She wore the cream blazer again, with a silk scarf tucked at the collar and her HOA badge polished enough to catch the room's reflection. Calvin Pike stood near the wall holding a tablet, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on the floor whenever anyone mentioned drainage. The air smelled of carpet cleaner, coffee, and chlorine drifting through the glass doors from the pool deck. Beverly told the room that certain residents were resisting improvements that benefited everyone. She spoke of fairness, shared investment, and the need to prevent individual homeowners from undermining amenities paid for by the community. Nobody said Warren's name. They did not have to. By the time Warren entered, Beverly had reached the part about enforcement. Heads turned, then turned away too quickly. Warren took a seat in the back row and rested the gray folder across his knees. Beverly glanced at him, smiled, and continued. She announced that non-compliant behavior near protected water features could result in accumulating fees, administrative review, and potential lien action if unpaid charges remained unresolved after 30 days. A few residents shifted in their folding chairs. One man coughed. The soda machine in the corner buzzed loudly in the pause. Warren did not speak. Beverly mistook that for fear. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of the full lake at sunset, the fountain rising from its center like proof of success. She said the board had acted decisively to protect the neighborhood's future. Warren looked at the photograph, then at Calvin, who had gone pale around the mouth. Beverly's confidence filled the room like perfume sprayed over mildew. When the meeting ended, she approached Warren near the exit and lowered her voice just enough to pretend she was being kind. She told him he could still resolve this quietly by paying the current balance and removing his markers. Warren looked through the glass doors toward the lake, where the fountain kept hissing under the pool lights. Then he looked back at her clipboard. "Send the lien warning," he said. Beverly blinked once. Warren walked out into the heavy summer dark with the certified maps still inside his folder, letting her believe she had pushed him one step closer to surrender. The lien warning came on a Friday morning, delivered by certified mail with Beverly Lowell's signature copied at the bottom in dark blue ink. Warren signed for it at the door, while the mail carrier wiped sweat from the back of his neck and glanced toward the dry creek bed without asking questions. The envelope was thick, stiff, and expensive, the kind of paper chosen by people who believed weight could become authority. Warren carried it to the kitchen table and opened it beside the county maps. The letter claimed his unpaid balance had reached $361.25, including the original creekline appearance disturbance fee, the shoreline harmony review charge, the unauthorized survey marker removal notice, and 5 days of water feature noncompliance surcharge. It warned that failure to cure the violation could result in collection action, legal fees, and a lien review before the board. At the bottom, Beverly had added one final line. Homeowners are reminded that individual preference must yield to the greater visual benefit of the community. Warren read that sentence twice. Then he placed it in the folder. Outside, the fountain at Serenity Lake hissed through the hot morning like a leak nobody wanted to admit existed. The creek behind his porch had faded into mud pockets and pale stones, and the air carried the stale smell of trapped water under dying grass. Warren walked the creekline again with his orange notebook, photographing each stake, each measurement, each inch the water had lost since Beverly's first notice. He marked the new level at 1 3/8 inches. Then he looked toward the lake, where sunlight glittered over a surface fed by a pipe no one had permission to install. That afternoon, he mailed copies of everything to the county stormwater office: the certified plat, the floodgate easement, the photos, the HOA notices, the lien warning, and a short typed timeline with dates, locations, and measurements. He did not add opinion. He did not need it. 2 days later, Beverly announced the lakefront property value walkthrough on the community bulletin board, in the newsletter, and on a glossy flyer taped to every mailbox kiosk. The event would showcase Cypress Bend's newest amenity to residents, local realtors, and prospective buyers invited by the board. There would be lemonade, folding chairs, a ribbon at the walking path, and a short presentation on vision-based neighborhood stewardship. Beverly liked words that made theft sound landscaped. By Saturday afternoon, the clubhouse lawn had been staged like a small-town ceremony. White folding chairs faced the man-made lake. A folding table held bottled water in silver tubs of ice, and 2 realtors in linen jackets stood near the path taking pictures of the fountain. The air smelled of sunscreen, warm plastic, fresh mulch, and chlorine from the pool gate that kept clanging every time another resident went in or out with a key fob. Golf carts lined the curb like little parade vehicles. The neighborhood had dressed up to admire a lake fed by a diversion no one had properly approved. Beverly stood near the lakeside path wearing her red blazer, pearl earrings, and nude heels that kept sinking into the damp grass. Calvin Pike hovered behind her with a tablet and a stack of printed agendas, his face shiny with sweat. Mrs. Crane sat in the second row with her grocery bag folded in her lap, staring not at the lake, but at the tree line where Warren's Creek should have been running. People knew something was wrong, even if Beverly had taught them not to say it out loud. Warren arrived 10 minutes late. He wore the same faded flannel shirt, dark jeans, and work boots, and he carried the gray folder under one arm with a rolled county map tucked beneath it. He did not walk to the front. He stood near the side of the path, where the crushed gravel made a soft, gritty sound under his boots, and the wind pushed the lake smell toward him, cold, stagnant, and faintly metallic. Beverly noticed him at once. Her smile sharpened. She began her presentation with phrases about property values, shared beauty, and the importance of decisive board leadership. Behind her, the fountain pushed diverted creek water into the air in a bright, obedient plume. Warren listened without moving. Beverly gestured toward the lake and called it a triumph of community vision, a feature that transformed Cypress Bend from ordinary suburbia into a premium Waterview neighborhood. A few people clapped politely. Calvin did not. At the edge of the gathering, a white county truck rolled slowly into the clubhouse parking lot, its tires crunching over gravel, its door bearing a plain stormwater division seal no one had invited. Elliot Ward stepped out with a clipboard of his own. Warren looked at Beverly, then at the lake, then at the old tree line beyond it. The trap was no longer being set. It was waiting to close. Beverly saw the county truck and kept smiling for 3 full seconds longer than her face wanted to. Elliot Ward walked across the clubhouse lawn with a flat brown envelope under one arm, his shoes picking up damp grass clippings near the edge of the path. The fountain hissed behind Beverly, bright and thin, tossing diverted creek water into the afternoon sun while the lake gave off a cold metallic smell beneath the heat. Warren did not move. Beverly lifted her clipboard slightly, as if paper could block a government seal on a truck door, and told the crowd the HOA always welcomed constructive partnerships with local offices. Her voice was smooth, but Calvin Pike shifted his weight and looked toward the parking lot like a man calculating the distance to his car. Elliot stopped beside the folding table, nodded once to Warren, and introduced himself to the board members in a tone so plain it made Beverly's presentation language sound even more artificial. He said the county had received a documented request for stormwater review related to natural drainage channel A3. A few residents turned toward one another. Mrs. Crane sat straighter in her chair. Beverly laughed softly and said this was only a landscaping matter, not a county issue. Warren opened the gray folder. He did it without drama, without speed, and without looking at Beverly for permission. First came the certified subdivision plat, weighted flat against the folding table with 2 unopened water bottles. Then came the stormwater drainage sheet, the easement index, the old maintenance note, and the photographs of the black culvert, the packed berm, the riprap stacked across the creek bed, and the dry stones behind his porch. One by one, the lake stopped being pretty. Warren pointed to the blue line on the map and said natural drainage channel A3 ran behind parcel 14C before Cypress Bend Estates had a clubhouse, a pool, or a lake with a marketing name. He pointed to the original protection language, the maintenance setback, and the clause forbidding obstruction or private impoundment without county review. Then he slid Beverly's notices beside the map: $218, $70, $46, $35, $31, $95, $12, $85 per day, and the lien warning claiming $361. 25. The numbers looked smaller when placed next to the law. Beverly tried to interrupt by saying homeowners were not authorized to interpret common area water features. Elliott answered before Warren had to. He said the creek was not a common area water feature, the county had no permit record for a drainage modification, and the photographs appeared to show an unapproved diversion into an ornamental basin. The word ornamental landed badly. Beverly's jaw tightened. The fountain kept hissing. Warren then unrolled the last sheet, older than the rest. Its paper yellowed at the edges, and its ink faded but still readable. He placed his finger under the line that mattered: floodgate access and operation reserved to Parcel 14C. Elliott confirmed the notation, then produced a stamped administrative acknowledgement showing Warren had submitted notice of lawful operation and requested restoration review. No one clapped. No one whispered. The silence was heavier than applause. Beverly looked from the map to Warren, then to the lake, finally understanding that the thing she had filled for prestige had been sitting inside someone else's recorded rights the entire time. Her clipboard lowered an inch. Calvin stopped pretending to read the tablet. Elliott explained that the county had completed a preliminary field check earlier that morning, and that any movement of the old gate would be a controlled release under stormwater supervision, not a private act by Warren. Across the grass, two county stormwater technicians in orange vests walked toward the old service path behind the lake, carrying a valve key, inspection tags, a laminated work order, and a small toolbox marked stormwater access. Beverly's smile disappeared completely. Warren stepped aside as Elliott read the determination aloud. The HOA was to cease interference with the natural drainage channel pending full review, preserve all altered materials, and allow access to the recorded flood control structure. The residents stared past Beverly toward the reeds at the back edge of the basin. A dull metal groan came from behind the brush, low and old, followed by the scrape of a gate that had not moved in years. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then the fountain sputtered. The plume collapsed from a proud white spray into a crooked cough, and ripples began moving the wrong way across Serenity Lake. Near the far bank, water slipped toward the hidden outlet, slow at first, then steady, pulling floating pollen, grass clippings, and Beverly's perfect reflection into a widening current. Someone gasped. Mrs. Crane covered her mouth. The lake level dropped just enough to reveal a wet brown ring along the decorative stones, and the smell changed from fountain water to raw mud. Warren watched calmly, his hands folded over the folder. This was not revenge with a hammer. This was gravity reading the paperwork. Beverly turned toward him, pale now beneath her makeup, and said he could not just drain an HOA amenity in front of everyone. Warren looked at the old map, then at the water finding its way back toward the creek behind his house. "I didn't drain anything," he said. "The county restored the drainage path on file. The record did the rest." By Monday morning, Serenity Lake had a brown ring around its stones, and Beverly Lowell had started calling it an ornamental basin in every written update. The fountain sat silent in the middle, tilted slightly where the water level had dropped below the intake, and its plastic housing clicked in the heat like something embarrassed to be seen. Along the clubhouse path, residents walked slower than usual, staring at exposed mud, wet grass clippings, and the ugly black mouth of the outlet that had been hidden behind ornamental reeds. The neighborhood smelled different now, not like prestige, like cold mud and wet clay left open in the sun. County Stormwater issued its preliminary determination before lunch, and Warren received a copy by certified email while sitting at the kitchen table with one hand resting near Helen's empty chair. The order was plain, 3 pages long, and devastating in the way simple language can be when it has authority behind it. Cypress Bend HOA was directed to cease all interference with natural drainage channel A3, preserve the altered berm, remove unpermitted riprap only under county supervision, submit a restoration plan within 10 business days, and provide documentation for any contractor who had touched the channel. There was no speech in it, just consequences. Beverly tried to hold control by sending a clarifying community update that afternoon, but the message only made things worse. She wrote that the lake enhancement project had encountered a temporary regulatory misunderstanding, and that resident cooperation would be necessary to protect shared values. Within minutes, replies began coming in from people who had never challenged the board before. One neighbor asked why HOA funds had been used on unpermitted drainage work. Another asked whether their dues would cover remediation. Mrs. Crane asked, very politely, whether the board had redirected water from a widower's property to improve lake views near the clubhouse. Nobody used Beverly's favorite words anymore. Warren did not answer the thread. He printed the county order, placed it in the gray folder, and walked outside to check the creek. Behind his house, the water had begun to return in a thin but living line, sliding over the stones with a sound so soft he almost missed it beneath the rasp of cicadas and the distant clatter of a pool gate. The mud still smelled sour, and the banks were scarred where the water had dropped too fast, but the current was there again, touching the exposed sycamore roots like an apology. Warren marked the new depth in his orange notebook. 2 7/8 inches. That was enough for the day. By Wednesday, the HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The room was packed, and the air carried the stale mix of carpet cleaner, coffee, wet umbrellas, and chlorine seeping in from the pool doors. Beverly sat at the front in her red blazer, but the color no longer looked powerful. It looked loud. Calvin Pike stood beside the projector and explained, in a voice that cracked once, that the association had received a county directive that all related fines against Warren Harrow were being suspended pending formal cancellation, and that the lien review would not proceed. Someone in the back said suspended, and Calvin corrected himself. Canceled. The $218.70 fee, the $46.35 review charge, the $31.95 notice, the $12.85 daily surcharge, and the $361.25 lien warning were all voided. Paper died quietly. Then came the estimate. A civil engineering firm would have to assess the channel. A licensed contractor would have to remove the berm. The HOA would need to restore the drainage corridor, stabilize the bank, replant native vegetation, and possibly reimburse affected property owners if erosion damage was confirmed. The preliminary range was not final, Calvin said, but even the low estimate started at $42,600 before engineering review, bank stabilization, and native replanting. Beverly reached for the microphone and said the board had acted in good faith to improve the community. Mrs. Crane stood before Beverly could finish. Her voice was small, but it carried. She asked who had voted to take water from a private parcel without county approval. Beverly said the board relied on internal landscape authority. Elliott Ward, seated near the back as a county observer, cleared his throat and said internal authority did not override recorded drainage rights. That sentence ended her. The board voted to remove Beverly from enforcement authority that night, then accepted her resignation as president after 20 minutes of closed discussion behind a thin clubhouse door that did nothing to muffle raised whispers. The meeting minutes later recorded that she had approved enforcement letters before verifying whether the board had authority over the watercourse. No one arrested her. No one dragged her away. She walked out holding her clipboard against her chest, while neighbors looked at her the way people look at a contractor who cracked the foundation and billed them for the privilege. Warren stayed until the vote was done, then left without speaking to her. Outside, the golf carts sat lined beneath the clubhouse lights, their windshields dotted with mist. From beyond the trees, where the man-made lake had begun shrinking back into an ordinary basin, he could hear the water moving home. By the end of the second week, the lake no longer looked like an amenity. It looked like evidence. The decorative stones around the edge had dried with a crooked brown stain. The fountain had been removed for inspection, and the walking path signs Beverly once ordered in brushed metal were stacked behind the clubhouse like props from a failed sales pitch. County flags and a posted notice of violation marked the berm behind Warren's lot, and a restoration crew worked under stormwater supervision, peeling back the riprap piece by piece while the smell of wet clay rose from the bank. Nobody called it beautification anymore. Warren stood at the edge of his backyard with Elliott Ward, Calvin Pike, and two board members who had suddenly learned to speak softly around drainage maps. The old floodgate structure sat half-hidden in the reeds, rusted but serviceable, its control wheel oiled and tagged after county inspection. Elliot read the final administrative letter aloud. Parcel 14C retained recorded access and operation rights to the old flood control gates. Natural drainage channel 3 had to be restored to its original course, and Cypress Bend HOA was prohibited from diverting, impounding, obstructing, or aesthetically modifying the channel without county review and written consent from the affected property owner. It was not dramatic language. It was worse for them. It was binding. The legal slap landed in the next line. The HOA's lake basin could remain only as a dry ornamental depression unless the association paid for a permitted, independent water source and full hydrology certification. The creek could not be used to fill it, decorate it, stabilize it, market it, or disguise it as a community water feature. Warren had opened the old floodgates, and the water had gone back where it belonged. He had taken it back without raising his voice. 3 days later, every homeowner received the amended policy. No HOA officer could enter, alter, mark, obstruct, redirect, inspect, assess, fine, or claim authority over any natural drainage feature, creek line, culvert, easement, runoff channel, or watercourse connected to a private parcel without recorded legal authority and county confirmation. The board also canceled every charge against Warren in writing, issued a formal correction to the lien warning, and approved reimbursement for his certified records, survey materials, and filing fees. The total was not huge, but it was exact. That mattered more. Beverly Lowell's name disappeared from the HOA letterhead by the end of the month. Her replacement removed the Serenity Lake language from the website and changed the basin's description to stormwater adjacent landscape area pending review, which sounded ugly because truth often does when it replaces marketing. Neighbors who had avoided Warren at the mailbox began nodding again. Mrs. Crane brought him a paper bag of tomatoes from her patio planters and said Helen would have liked hearing the creek. Warren thanked her, then stood on the porch until she reached the sidewalk. By late September, the water had settled into its old rhythm. It slipped under the sycamores, touched the stones, carried yellow leaves along the bend, and made that soft, steady sound Warren had missed more than he had admitted. The backyard still bore scars, and the bank would need another season to heal, but the current was alive again. Some evenings, when the HOA golf cart rolled slowly through the cul-de-sac, it passed his house without stopping, its tires whispering over clean asphalt, its driver careful not to look toward the creek too long. Warren never waved from anger. He never smiled from victory. He simply sat beside Helen's empty wicker chair, one mug on the rail, listening to water do what paper had finally allowed it to do. The neighborhood learned something after that. Power printed on cream letterhead is still powerless when it contradicts the record. A clipboard can scare people for a while, but it cannot move a creek forever. And sometimes the quietest man on the street is not avoiding a fight. He is waiting until the truth has a signature, a stamp, and a map. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.